How many times a day do you do that? Or maybe not at all. Some of you use this stuff, some of you don't. I have had this on my desk, or one of these on my desk for the better part of a decade. And every time I come in, I will use that because I shake a lot of hands, meet a lot of people, and germs, right? I'm not a germaphobe. I'm not Niles Crane from Frasier or anything silly like that. But, I was raised and taught even as an adult, you need to clean your hands now and then. But that can become a thing that is habit, where I don't even know I'm doing it. I just come in and I hit that thing. I get down to the desk, and it's like, did I even shake any hands? No. So what germs am I even dealing with here? Because it's just habit or tradition, and it's just something that I do, muscle memory at this point. However, sometimes it becomes something a little bit more. This is going to seem like a strong word, but it's really not. A little bit more insidious than that. You've probably been out to eat with friends, and somebody gets out one of those little miniature sanitizer bottles, and they start passing it around to their family, and that's all fine and good. You don't care, whatever. And then they say, do you want any? And you say, no. And they look at you like, but do you want any? And you say, no. I don't use that stuff. It dries out my hands. Whatever the reason is for you. And they go, but do you want any? You just know, okay, fine, sanitize me, whatever. Because it's become a thing, right? It's become a thing. And I'm not even talking about all the COVID stuff and all that. That's been happening for years and years. In fact, it's been happening for thousands of years. And sometimes it's rooted in cleanliness, sometimes it's rooted in tradition. In the text we're going to look at today, it had become a matter of religious tradition, and as a matter of religious tradition, had even become a matter of religious judgmentalism. That just seems so crazy, but it was true. Why? Well, the first few times that I read this passage, I missed a couple of things, and I want to dive into what I missed. So grab your Bible, Mark chapter 7, and let's dive into this week's study. So we're going through the life of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, and we're to chapter 7 and verse 1, and he has just walked on water. He has just fed 5,000 people from just 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, basically a kid's lunch, and he's done all these other miracles of healing and everything else. And yet, what gets Jesus in trouble next is just a matter as simple as, did you clean your hands? Why are your disciples so nasty? That seems crazy, but that's because there's really a lot going on here. So let's read the text and we'll take a look at why they got in trouble for something as simple as, why didn't you wash your hands right? The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" Well, I've been in some places where they would have asked the same question. Did you wash your hands? In fact, probably you or your parents have uttered those words just recently. So did you wash your hands? Y'all get ready. Go wash your hands. Supper's ready. It's not really an uncommon thing. So why is this a controversial story in the life of Jesus? So the Pharisees are already examining Jesus' actions under a microscope. They are looking constantly for anything that he might do as a slip-up so that they can point out, see, you can't be the Messiah, you can't be the Son of God, you can't be all that because you don't even wash your hands. Well, we don't know whether Jesus did or not, but we know his disciples didn't. They were just normal, everyday people, and they were hungry, probably starving. Everything we've got leading up to this point shows that they were in a circumstance and a time in their ministry when they were so busy they sometimes were skipping meals and everything else, and they sit down to eat, and they're starving, right? You got 12 hungry men. That sounds like a good spoof, doesn't it, on 12 Angry Men? You got 12 hungry men, and they are diving right into their meal, but they're not keeping the traditions that they were supposed to. That's according to the people who saw them. Again, people who are looking constantly to see, are you doing that right? Are you doing that right? Are you doing that right? Don't you love being around people like that? And this is the problem. So Mark gives us a little bit of insight. He knows that, like some of us, people that are going to be reading this later on are Gentiles. They don't know all the Jewish traditions of the time. So he tells us what's going on here. And what's going on is that over time they had developed a tradition of not just that you wash your hands before you eat, but how you wash your hands and how many times you wash your hands before you eat. Now, under the law of Moses, it would have been normal for you to have washed your hands. But the Pharisees, maybe with some good intentions at first, are concerned with, well, we don't just want to not do what's wrong, and we don't just want to do what's right. We want to make sure that we do it righter than right. We don't want to get anywhere near disobedience or anywhere near becoming ceremonially unclean. Ceremonially unclean means they can't go and participate in certain religious rituals. They can't go to the temple. They can't do things at the temple and all of that. And there's more to it than that, but just fly over time right now. That's what that means, is that there would be things you couldn't do religiously or even socially because you were unclean for a while. So, to make sure that you're not unclean, you had to wash your hands before you went to a meal. Okay, that's normal. Okay, that's even normal. That's normal for us, not the ritualistic side of it, but the cleanliness side of it. Well, over time, they had decided, now we don't want to be even taking a risk that we might still be unclean. So, instead of washing your hands like you're supposed to, we think it would be best if you washed your hands multiple times. And they built up a ritual, long story short, where you washed your hands 7 times, and that way you made sure that you were not unclean. And the problem is, okay, maybe you want to wash your hands multiple times because you want to be sure. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem comes in when then you say, I noticed that your disciples, they only washed their hands once. Or they didn't wash their hands at all, or they washed them only 3 times, or I'm not sure that they quite dabbed all that water off with the towel just right. I think that you may be disqualified. There's an example of something similar to this from a religious point of view just in the news the other day. Maybe you saw it on social media or in the news, where a priest who had not been saying the right words as prescribed by his religious authority. I'm not picking on anybody here. This is just the story. He had not said the words correctly and in the right order and fully at baptisms, and so the church declared all of those baptisms null and void. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds of that whole religious debate, but I'm just saying we now have ourselves and in various religious groups the same problem. We could look at this thing and say, oh, that's so crazy that they would get all upset about. Maybe they even washed their hands once, but it just wasn't enough, so it wasn't what qualified and it didn't count, so they talk as if they didn't wash their hands at all, because that kind of thing happened, and we see it actually happening in Scripture at times. So maybe that's even what was going on here. Maybe they didn't wash at all. I don't know. What we know is that whatever they did and did not do did not meet the watching eye of the religious authorities of the day. But here's the problem, and I think this is also the problem with this contemporary religious story, and that is this. We start holding our traditions of how we do certain things, even if they are things required by God, like baptism. We start looking at how we do those things under such a traditional, ritualistic, and legalistic way that we will see something done in obedience to God and disqualify it because it wasn't in obedience to our declarations about how to do obedience to God. You following me? And this is what happens. That's what the deal is with those baptisms. That's what the deal is with this hand washing. And Jesus looks at these men and says, you bunch of hypocrites. That's pretty strong, right? That's what he says. You bunch of hypocrites. Because what you're doing is looking at this whole event totally and only through the eyes of, but did we do that right according to the traditions? And you're missing the whole point of why it was supposed to happen. Why do you wash your hands? You're missing the whole point of what's actually like happening right in front of you. Again, what's happening right in front of them? 12 hungry men are finally getting to take a break from serving, preaching, helping, and healing the people in their community. And they're sitting down, they're starving, and they're enjoying fellowship with one another, and they're honoring God in all of that work. They're honoring God and coming together and building one another up at the table. And all these guys can see is, hey, did you get enough of this on your hands? It doesn't work with just one pump. You must do 7 pumps. And I don't think that you did this the right way. And Jesus looks at them. This is what he actually says. Let's read the text, and then we'll go on with the application. Jesus looks at them and says, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain, and their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God, and you're holding on to human traditions. This might actually seem for a second like Jesus is being kind of harsh because, after all, this is on both sides. This is just a conversation about a meal and hand washing, right? No, because again, what's really going on is a fellowship meal of people who have been serving the Lord, who were starving and hungry, and now they're finally getting a break. And through all of that, they've been honoring God. And Jesus says, do you not see that the whole point of rules about cleanliness was about their fellowship with God, not their obedience to you and your rules? You talk a good game. You're saying this like this is what because he's the Son of God, and therefore the law of Moses came through him too. Like that's what I wanted. That's what God wanted. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to protect you from germs, sure. I wanted you to come to me with clean hands, but even more importantly, a clean heart. And these men have done that. They've been serving the Lord, and they're hungry. They're receiving a blessing and a reward for the work that they've been doing. And all you can see is, hey, you're not doing that right. So that's not what the faith is all about. That is never what I called you to. I never called you to be judges of one another so that your heart is so far away from the mercy and the love that is found at this table. You are missing the fellowship because you're only focused on the sanitizer. That's a mess. That's a complete and utter mess. He says, you know what? Isaiah was right about you hypocrites. You have completely missed the forest for the trees. And then he goes on with another example. Let's look at the text again. He goes deeper, and he continued, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is korban, that is, devoted to God, then you no longer let them do anything for their father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you have many things like that. Now, it's interesting because Jesus brings up an example that at first to us might seem like an unrelated non sequitur. Why are we now talking about obedience and helping out your parents and all of that? Here's why. When we come to this text, we can be tempted to see this as an argument over is tradition right or wrong? That, again, is not really what Jesus is getting at. His problem is not with tradition. His problem is with how you view tradition, and when tradition comes in to replace true faith, true obedience, and true honor of God and His principles that He calls us to live by. Weird example, but I'm going to use it anyway. I can't believe it's not butter. So many people refuse to eat real butter because over the years they've been told, butter is like the worst thing ever and you should stay away from butter. And so they've stayed away from butter. Now, what really needed to happen was the principle. The principle is moderation. You don't want to get into gluttony of butter. That can be risky and detrimental to your health. But is butter okay in moderation? Sure. Does butter even make things better? Oh yeah. I don't know that it makes you any healthier. I don't know about that, but I will tell you this. It makes a lot of things better and more enjoyable. And that enjoyment brings honor to God. Okay? It brings honor to God. But that doesn't mean that we ought to abuse that and become gluttons of it. But rather than learn moderation and self-discipline, we looked for a substitute. And we said, this will be much healthier. And so people started making things like, I can't believe it's not butter, and margarine and things like that. Things which, in the long run, are far more dangerous and detrimental to our health than the real thing. But people swear up and down, it tastes just like butter. But let me tell you something. It does not. It does not. I can't believe it's not butter. Other margarines, do they taste just like butter? No, they don't. Do they have the same texture as butter? No, they don't. Are they as good as butter? No, they are not. Do you get the same enjoyment and then therefore give the same level of honor and glory to God because of it? No, you don't. I'm not saying that's ungodly. Eat what you want, okay? But, we use the substitute so long that some people have forgotten how wonderful the real thing is. Because in trying to keep a rule, in that case a rule of, I can't have something with this much cholesterol, or I can't have something with this much, certain kinds of fats or whatever, whatever their reasons are for avoiding butter. I can't have all that, so I'm going to keep the modern tradition of man of never ever eat real butter. And so I'm going to eat this. And it's become a tradition, a rule. Oh no, I would never eat the real thing. I must have this because it's just it's definitely healthier for you. That's all been proven to be untrue, but it's definitely healthier for you. But even though it tastes worse, even though it is worse, because we've done it so long, and it's cheaper, and it's more convenient, and it just fits the way that we have come to habitually and traditionally live our life. Mama always had, country crock. I'm going to have country crock. And, it just feels like home to have that little brown, tub of chemicals in my refrigerator. And so that's what I'm going to have. But we've settled for a cheap substitute. And this is the real point of what Jesus is saying. He's not saying tradition is automatically bad. He's saying you guys have settled for a substitute, papier-mâché, imitation butter religion. It isn't real. You have slowly replaced all the principles, love, justice, mercy, humility. What was happening here at the table? Fellowship, kindness, meeting one another's needs. You've replaced all those things with the, I can't believe it's not the law of Moses. I can't believe it's not grace. And all you have left is a bunch of empty, heartless rules. Heartless, not because they're tradition, heartless because you've sucked the heart out of them, because you've become judges of whether or not people are keeping your tradition. And then you've made it worse. People are getting hurt. He goes into this second example. He says, they've got this thing called Corban, and that just means I have set this money aside for God. He says, you've taken this money and you've set it aside for God. And now the family falls on hard times, and parents are, we'll bring this into examples of our lives and times. Parents are hungry. Parents can't pay for their medication. Parents need money for rent. Maybe they need a place to stay. Maybe they need to come and live with us. But you have told the family who wants to help their parents, well, you can't do that because you promised that money to God, and you don't want to shortchange God, do you? And so you send them home saying you can't help the parents because you already promised that $100 to God. You can't use it for their medication. That's hard for most of us to imagine. It's really hard for me to imagine as a Christian. I've never been in a church where the religious leaders did that. But we probably all know, or some of you may have even experienced, people who have had exactly that experience. I know people who could remember from their previous way of following Christ, where the group that they were with would send a priest around or a minister around to present a bill and not leave until it was paid. And the financial condition of the family didn't matter. What hardship they were going through didn't matter. They had a religious bill and they were to pay it. And this is what's happening here. The religious leaders have said to families, no, you can't take care of your family because that was given to God. And Jesus is saying, given to God. Nothing is more given to God than when you honor your father and your mother. Nothing is a greater service to God. So important is this, he says, that under the law of Moses, not fulfilling those purposes could bring the death penalty if you were that cruel to your parents. But you are now forcing people to be disobedient to the true principles of the law of Moses in order to keep obedience to your religious requirement, your tradition, which is not even written in the law, did not show up on those tablets of stone, was not revealed to Moses, but something that you guys put into place as your tradition and your rules. He says, and that is wrong. And then he says, and you know what? You have a whole lot of those things. We need to learn from this, that we need to be real careful that first, that we simply are not sitting in the judgment seat, constantly looking around and saying to our brothers and sisters in Christ, you're not doing that right because we do it this way. You're not doing that right because in our church we blah, 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 blah. We need to be real careful that we don't lose what's real in the Christian faith and replace it with what is mere rule-keeping, tradition-keeping, and empty practice. We need to focus in on what Jesus is trying to call our attention back to: love, mercy, justice, humility, supporting one another, uplifting one another, and seeing. And just think about the wonderful meal that they could have had if those Pharisees had shown up and instead of judging how they'd wash their hands, had said, hey, could we join you? We've heard good things about you and we'd like to know what's going on. What if they had learned from Jesus that day? What if they had enjoyed the fellowship of the disciples that day? See, they missed all those opportunities because their nose was bent too high according to their religious tradition. As Christians, I'm going to speak to my brothers and sisters first. As Christians, we got to make sure that's not what we're doing. We want to share Jesus, love, mercy, justice, kindness, grace, and never replace that with, but are you doing it our way? We're going to get more into this next week, but we're out of time for tonight. And I encourage you to join us as we do, and join us as we worship together on Sunday at 10 o'clock at the Early Church of Christ. God bless you and have a great week.